Instagram can make self-care look like a lifestyle you're supposed to achieve. Calm becomes brand. Rest becomes an aesthetic. Healing becomes content. And if your real life doesn't match that vibe, if you're tired, stretched thin, or just trying to make it through the day, you can start to feel like you're doing self-care wrong. Today, we're talking about the gap between Instagram self-care and real self-care, and why the unpretty version still counts, especially when it's the thing that keeps you steady. Welcome to Wisdom from the Porch. I'm GP. This is Wisdom from the Porch. Let's start with something simple and honest. Social media is not neutral. Even when you're not actively comparing yourself, your brain is still taking notes. It's still collecting evidence about what a good life looks like. It's still forming expectations about what health looks like, what rest looks like, what productivity looks like, and what a together person looks like. So when you scroll through a feed full of curated self-care, glowing skin, perfect morning routines, expensive supplements lined up like trophies, homes that look like they were designed for a photo shoot, it can quietly plant an idea. That's the standard. That's what it's supposed to look like. And then real life shows up. Real life is loud. Real life is inconvenient. Real life comes with dishes and deadlines, family dynamics, unpredictable emotions, chronic stress, finances, and bodies that won't always cooperate. So what happens? A lot of people don't just feel tired. They feel tired and wrong. Not just overwhelmed and behind. Not just needing care and guilty for needing it. And that guilt is where the self-care conversation gets distorted, because guilt doesn't push you into care. Guilt actually pushes you into performance. It pushes you to do things that look like self-care instead of things that function as self-care. And that's the first big shift this episode is inviting. Self-care isn't what looks soothing. Self-care is what reliably supports your well-being. That's it. That's the whole game. If it supports you, it counts. If it drains you, it's not care, even if it photographs well. Now, here's why this matters more than people admit. The self-care aesthetic is built for attention, not for nervous systems. It's built for engagement, not for reality, because algorithms don't reward the quiet stuff. Algorithms don't reward going to bed early, drinking water, taking your meds, asking for help, saying no, setting boundaries, skipping the party because your brain is fried, eating something simple because you're depleted, or logging off because you're overstimulated. Those are some of the most powerful forms of care a person can practice, and they rarely look cinematic. But online, self-care often gets packaged like a product. It's shiny, it's purchasable, it's aspirational. And the subtle message becomes, if you want to be okay, buy your way there, style your way there, perform your way there. Which is the problem, because it makes people think their care isn't valid unless it's expensive, time-consuming, and aesthetically pleasing. And then self-care becomes one more place where you can fail. But real-life self-care, actual self-care, isn't about meeting an internet standard. It's about meeting your needs. So let's talk about needs, because that's where the substance lies. Most of the time when people say, I need self-care, they're not asking for luxury. They're asking for relief. They're asking for a moment when their body stops bracing. They're asking for a moment when their mind stops sprinting. They're asking for something that makes life feel survivable again. And that kind of care often looks like what some people would dismiss as bare minimum. But bare minimum isn't shameful. Bare minimum is strategy. Bare minimum is, I'm not going to abandon myself today. Bare minimum is I'm going to stay on my own side. Sometimes the most self-respecting thing you can do is pick the option that's simple, easy, and sustainable, because you know you're running on fumes. That's why the cereal dinner idea hits people so hard. Not because cereal is magical, but because it symbolizes something bigger. Permission to stop performing wellness. Permission to stop pretending you have more capacity than you do. Permission to choose a form of care that matches the energy you actually have. And this is where self-care gets real. Self-care has to be honest. If you're low capacity, low energy, overwhelmed, overstimulated, or emotionally fragile, the best self-care is rarely the most impressive self-care. It's the most fitting self-care. It fits your body, it fits your budget, it fits your schedule, it fits your nervous system, and it fits the truth. And the truth is, most people are out here doing the best they can with limited bandwidth. So let's strip the filter off and say it plainly. Real self-care often looks like reducing load, not adding more. A lot of people hear self-care and think it means doing more things. But more things isn't always care. Sometimes more things is just another demand, another chore disguised as healing. So here are a few things real self-care might look like. Choosing the simplest food option because feeding yourself matters more than impressing anyone. Clearing one small surface so your brain can breathe. Taking a shower because you need a reset, not because it's part of a routine. Turning the lights down because you're overstimulated. Stepping outside for 2 minutes to interrupt the spiral. Letting the laundry wait because rest is the emergency. Logging off because your nervous system can't take one more comparison. Canceling plans because you know you'll pay for it tomorrow. None of that is glamorous, but it's protective, and protection is care. Now here's the key that changes the way you approach this. Self-care is not a personality, it's a practice. It's not a brand, it's not a vibe, it's not something you are. It's something you do again and again based on what you need in the moment. And the moment matters, because what's caring on one day might be harmful on another. For example, pushing yourself might be brave one day and self-abandonment the next. Rest might be healing one day and avoidance the next. So the question isn't, what does self-care look like? The question is, what does care look like for me today? There's a gentle way to answer that without turning it into a checklist. Ask yourself this. What would make the next 2 hours easier to live through? Not what would fix my whole life. Not what would turn me into a person I think I'm supposed to be. Just what would make the next 2 hours easier? That question is compassionate and realistic. It works when you're anxious. It works when you're depressed. It works when you're burned out. It works when you're overwhelmed. It works when you're numb. And it works when you're overstimulated. And it points you toward care that's practical instead of performative. Because the nervous system doesn't need perfection. It needs signals of safety. And what does safety look like? It looks like enough food, enough water, enough sleep, fewer demands, supportive connection, realistic expectations, and permission to be human. Now let's talk about why Instagram makes this harder. The hidden problem with curated self-care is that it trains your brain to confuse appearance with effectiveness. You start to believe, if it looks calm, it must be calm. If it looks healthy, it must be healthy. If it looks grounded, it must be grounded. But you already know that's not true. A beautiful morning routine can happen alongside panic attacks. A spotless home can happen alongside depression. A perfect photo can happen alongside deep loneliness. A wellness brand can happen alongside burnout. And that's not shame, that's reality. So if you're watching someone's calm and feeling behind, remember, you're comparing your inside to someone else's outside. And your inside is not failing because it's honest. It's just human. So how do you engage social media without letting it run your self-worth? You don't need a dramatic detox. You just need a relationship shift. Instead of using the feed as a ruler, use it as a menu. A ruler measures you. A menu serves you. A ruler says, how do I stack up? A menu says, what might help me? So if you see something and it genuinely inspires you, take what helps and leave the rest. But if you see something and it makes you feel ashamed, pressured, or smaller, don't negotiate with that feeling. That's your cue. Your brain is telling you, this input isn't good for me right now. And that awareness is self-care too. Because real self-care isn't only what you add, it's also what you reduce. Sometimes care looks like unfollowing without guilt, muting without explanation, taking a break from comparison triggers, and choosing creators who normalize reality instead of selling perfection. Not out of fragility, out of wisdom. Now here's the point where I want to land this plane. The goal isn't to hate Instagram. I mean, I have an Instagram account, thatbassvoice. The goal, yeah, I plugged myself. The goal is to stop letting it define what counts as care. Because the most dangerous lie in self-care culture is this: if it's not pretty, it doesn't count. That lie makes people abandon the very practices that keep them above water. It makes people think they don't deserve care unless they can do it right. But care isn't a reward for being impressive. Care is a requirement for being human. So whether your self-care today looks like a walk or a nap or a boundary or a simple meal or doing less on purpose, if it supports you, it counts. If it helps you breathe easier, it counts. If it helps you stay here, it counts. And if you needed to hear this plainly, you do not have to earn rest. You do not have to perform healing. You do not have to be aesthetically pleasing to deserve care. And that's the conversation on the porch today. Instagram can make self-care look like a lifestyle you're supposed to achieve. Calm becomes a brand. Rest becomes an aesthetic. Healing becomes content. But real self-care is what supports you in real life, especially when you're tired and your capacity is low. And sometimes the most honest form of care is the simplest one. If this episode helped, subscribe to Wisdom from the Porch with GP. Leave a review and share it with somebody who's tired of performing wellness. And if you want to, drop a comment with one sentence. What does real self-care look like for you today? This episode was designed to help you trade self-care aesthetics for self-care that actually works. And as always, thank you to Cloud Microphones for supporting these conversations. This has been Wisdom from the Porch. I'm GP. You're always welcome on the porch.